Hello and welcome to FinTechTalk. I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today we're looking at one of the most revolutionary developments in payments in a generation, the arrival of the SEPA instant payments scheme. For the end of this year, banks in the European area will be required to process payments in under 10 seconds and to notify participants in 10 seconds also. Banks are struggling with this. It's not a secret. We're finding that 58% of banks say the timeline is not realistic. So by the end of this year, banks are seriously going to have to sort their act out. What's going wrong? What should they do? Well, here at FinTechTalk, we love to find the best people in the world to share their knowledge with you. That's what we're doing today. So may I introduce our first panelist, Nadish Ladd. Nadish, if you want to turn your camera on and say hello. Nadish is Global Head of Product and Strategic Business at Volante Technologies, which many of you will know in the payment space. Volante is US-based, but has a global clientele, Goldman Sachs, Citi, BNY Mellon, and for 2 decades has been servicing payments via a cloud-native software-as-a-service platform. It's one of the fastest ways to upgrade your bank. And Nadish is regarded as one of the world experts in this area. So Nadish, wonderful to have you here. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, Charles.
Great. And we also have David Yuri. David is the founder and CEO of Banking Reports London. David has been training CEOs, boards, executives from over 50 countries in the nuances of fintech. Again, no one knows more about the subject than David. So we're going to absolutely have a masterclass on SEPA instant payments today. David, wonderful to see you.
Yes, great to see you. Great to be on FinTechTalk.
Great. And let's just start off. I mean, we have a report by Red Compass Labs surveying payment professionals, 200 of them in the Euro area, talking about readiness for the SEPA instant payment scheme. Now, they've had plenty of time to think about this, and it turns out 58% say the timeline is not realistic. Germany looking shambolic. I think only 1 in 3 banks is ready. So, David, how bad is this? What on earth is going on?
Well, SEPA Instant Credit Transfer has been originally introduced in 2017. So these good old banks have already had 6 peaceful years to voluntarily introduce this innovation. And they largely failed to do so. So now there is some regulatory pressure on them. And even with regulatory pressure in the background, 58% says impossible to do it on time. So this is a textbook case of legacy and complexity dragging banks back and slowing them down. And this is part of the banking innovation paradox. Banks have amazing resources. Banks are typically profitable. Banks have economy of scale. And yet they fail to innovate at big time.
It is. It's just so revealing. It is a shambles. I mean, that's a horrible word to use. But Nadish, let's just plunge in. As David says, they've got tons of resources, banks, and yet they're still not capable of complying. What is going wrong?
Charles, I think the primary reason for this basic problem, which is technology. Technology that the banks have been using for a very long time is what we call legacy today. And instant payments is all about looking at the future, 24/7 capabilities, all of these things. So essentially what is happening is that you've got legacy technology, you need to upgrade the infrastructure to adopt SEPA instant payments. But what is your business case to build this transformation? How do you justify spending and revamping your technology to actually come up with or offer SEPA Instant as a product? And that is where the whole struggle has been going on for a while.
Yeah, let's just talk about that, Nadish, because improving payments, I mean, how much of a leap forward is this? I mean, the Volante approach is to, connect cloud-native technologies, API connectivity. I mean, when banks do it wrong, what are they doing wrong? Are they trying to do it themselves?
Well, it's not just a question about doing it themselves. It's about having that experience of implementing real-time payments while you're undergoing a big transformation.
Okay, we do actually have a little bit of breakdown from the survey, by the way. Yeah, we do, and David, we do have some breakdowns. I mean, the challenges facing banks include offering confirmation of payee service, implementing KYC and sanction screening provisions. That made a lot of banks uncomfortable. Processing more volumes and scaling. There are requirements about the ability to process payments simultaneously or within a certain time frame. A lot of banks said that they could do instant payments, but if they scaled, they would break. Pretty damning situation. And 24/7 availability. The instant payments needs to happen. It is 24/7. That is going to be a regulatory requirement. And again, banks struggling with that too. So it looks as if it's not just one sort of payment node that is the failure point. It looks as if this is exposing a whole host of problems throughout banking. David, is that about right? Am I being cruel?
Well, the problems begin on a core banking level. So core banking systems are trying to basically simplify great complexity. And even when they are outdated, even when they are not outdated, they fail big time. It's hard to operate these core banking systems. It's hard to display agility on top of them. And banks are struggling with this. There is a shortage of talent globally. There is a difficulty to get processes right. There are new technologies entering banking basically every month. There are new channels. The more new channels you have, the exponentially more complexity you have across these channels. Omni-channel, opti-channel. These are very complex things to reach. And at the end of the day, instead of innovating at intergalactic pace, what we see is a certain level of paralysis.
Love it. Paralysis. Nadish, how do you see it? Because you work with tier one banks like Citi, BNY Mellon, all the way through to sort of neobanks. I mean, do you agree with David's proposition that it may come all the way down to the core? A lot of banks running on strange, outmoded, sort of weird, esoteric cores. Do you find that they're the laggards and that other banks that have upgraded to the sort of, there's some great cloud native cores, Thought Machine, Mambu. Is that what's going on under the bonnet?
Yes, definitely. As I said right at the start, it's the technology infrastructure play. That, as David pointed out, the core banking, if that is not available 24/7, if it operates in a batch mode, that is the first hurdle itself. That's the big problem that the bank needs to start thinking about. We spoke about the sanctions. We spoke about real-time SLAs. All of these, once you start adding them up, the question becomes, which problem that we are seeing, as David pointed out, a certain amount of indecision or paralysis, as he called it. So that's where we think the problem lies. The technology infrastructure play is what is hampering it.
Yeah, so it cuts deep. I mean, I'm looking at stuff like fraud detection. If you're processing payments in 3 days, you've got plenty of time for your archaic system, for the cogs to turn, to do certain checks. If you're processing payments in, well, under 10 seconds is the SEPA rules, but I noticed the really best performers, certainly in the UK, like Revolut, like Monzo, even the high street banks are processing what feels like about half a second. Fraud detection needs to happen very, very, very fast. Nadish, again, is that another bottleneck that a lot of banks are able to do some of the payment system adequately, but are really let down on affiliated processes like fraud detection?
Actually, as real-time payments are increasing across the globe, as more countries are adopting them, there is more focus on fraud. Rightly, to the reason you pointed out, that it's 10 seconds, the money is gone. Most of the banks today are doing fraud post facto. We are not doing a real-time fraud within the SLA's window. And that is where one of those decision points on what needs to be done is causing the indecision, because everyone is worried, okay, money will go out in 10 seconds. What do we do then? And that is where, of course, the scheme is talking about limits, and the banks can set up limits, etc., etc. But yes, the problem is that fraud is now becoming one of the top discussed points on how do you manage to achieve real-time fraud.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to ask to discuss the sanctions that will be applied. Some banks are not going to hit the deadline. What's going to happen to them? I mean, is it clear what happens to banks who don't comply?
Me?
Yeah, David. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So basically, the sanctioning is unclear, and that's one of the problems. And actually, regulators are first going to use soft methodologies like communications in a group with decision makers and leaders of banks, informal indications, and so on. However, this is in the best interest of banks to comply, and it would have been in their best interest to proactively introduce SEPA instant credit transfers anyway in the time window since 2017. And actually, in the legislation, there are some points which are unclear. And this is a very, very problematic thing because, for example, from PSD2, one of the legacy regulatory problems has been the very definition of the underlying payments account. And what is happening in the SEPA instant credit transfer regulation? They are using the same ill-defined, undefined, liquid expression payments account. And actually, this is very problematic, and this is causing difficulties for 7,000 banks across the European Economic Area. So the regulators have also made some mistakes, while the banks are often paralyzed, and the great losers, unfortunately, are the customers, the clients. So basically, sooner or later, there will have to be full compliance. However, this is going to be an uphill battle because banks first need to get data right. Data is the input resource of the 21st century post-industrial capitalism. Data is the new oil. Data is the new oxygen. Data is the new currency. And banks used to be kings of data. They used to hold and obtain and operate with the most rich, most valuable financial data of millions and tens of millions of clients. However, gradually, in the course of the past 20 years, banks have fallen behind. And now they are paralyzed. They are unable to get their internal data right. And therefore, they are mostly and largely unable to monetize that data, unable to capitalize on that data wealth, which they are presumably and theoretically sitting on top. And this inability to comply on time with SEPA instant credit transfers is just the tip of the iceberg.
So what do we do? I mean, there must be people watching here thinking, yeah, God, my bank is struggling. We don't really know the path forward. There are too many items on the agenda. I mean, Nadish, what can be done? It sounds quite radical to say, well, in order to comply, you're going to need a new core banking engine because that's going to take 3 years. Nadish, what do you think? What do you recommend as a short fix and a long-term fix?
Well, actually, you have to go think of the long-term fix and start. And one of the things we are seeing in the industry is looking at different business models on how do you do that incremental transformation, how do you take those steps, and payments as a service, SaaS. These are the ways by which the banks can work collaboratively with providers, whether it's fraud, whether it's payment processing, whether it's sanctions, whether it's resiliency. All of these things, if you take into account, start at end state of having a great technology for which you can monetize further down the line. The investment that you make today under this regulatory window can be actually useful for your business benefits. Back to what David was talking about, the data monetization, etc., getting that back on track. So the question is, there's no single technology which will do this. That's where we think that the best way would be to look at these business models of these which will support this journey.
Okay, Nadish, and I just want to ask you about the timeline. If someone were to adopt a cloud-native payment platform such as Volante, what the time frame is. I mean, banks tend to like to take 18 months, 2 years, 3 years to adopt a new technology. Realistically, when you work with a bank that wants to modernize, what is the time frame? People want to get a move on with this because the deadline is looming. How fast can people move?
Look, there's no fixed number you can come up with. It all depends on what the banks can be. As quickly as 3 to 5 months, it could be done. And that is where we again talk about things like payments as a service or software as a service. That's where you can gain time because you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about resilience. All of these things are taken care and as a bundle out of that. So our thought process way to start this is by taking these box solutions, who have done it, people who have implemented it, and that's your best chance of hitting the deadline.
Okay, that's great. Nadish, you had a little bit of cracking up, so people are watching this thinking it's Nadish's audio is a little glitchy. Yeah, it's I think maybe Nadish, but you recovered, Nadish, so you're now rock solid. David, let's talk about people. I'm fascinated by the idea that banks would like to modernize and change, but they just can't find the right people, or people have been trained in obsolete technologies, and they're going to struggle with some of the more cloud-native solutions that are out there. You work with people, training them. You work with everyone from CEOs through to sort of executives. What is your perception from the banks you work with? Is this a manpower problem as much as it is a technology problem?
Well, I am working with absolutely amazing bankers, very talented, very capable people all around the world, board level, CEOs, top management, running huge banks with tens of millions of clients and thousands of branches. However, technology complexity has reached a level where across the board, banks just simply have to spend more on it. And by better talent, more talent, more people who are so capable and so talented. And it costs money. Basically, first, you have to sacrifice some of your cost to income ratio excellence, and shareholders will be ambivalent about this. Shareholders will ask you, where is my instant profit? And you have to explain that in order to unlock sustainable profitability for the rest of the 21st century, and presumably you want to be in business for the rest of the 21st century, first you have to sacrifice some instant profitability or short-term profitability and get your data right. For example, when we talk about SEPA instant credit transfers, it somewhat overlaps and coincides with certain compliance requirements related to PSD2, PSD3, related to validation of payee, related to many other digital identity regulations. And to comply in multiple areas at the same time is so hard, so resourceful, that banks basically have to invest more into this. But by the time banks comply just the simple level 0 minimum compliance, they are so tired and they spend so much on that project that resources are very, very, very scarce for building any added value on top of that. Yeah. So by the time you get your sanction screening on transaction level, account level, KYC, scaling, 24/7 availability, validation of payee, every aspect of the value chain right, just to comply, by that time you have had enough. By that time the CEO is beating the table, everyone, the regulators are putting sanctions on you, the shareholders don't understand what the CEO is doing to fail to be compliant. And by that time, the last thing you can think about is value creation. You know, this is the problem. And banks must become a little bit more simple, much more focused. For example, new banking channels are popping up every month. And you have to be selective. I can now easily list 50, 60, 70 different banking channels. All of these are theoretically relevant. But you have to limit your bank to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, or 20 channels and get those 12 or 20 right. Only do channels in which you can be one of the best in your market. Don't do every channel. Multi-channel is past. Coordinating 30, 40, 50 digital channels with each other in terms of pricing, in terms of marketing, in terms of security, in terms of omni-channel, in terms of communications, in terms of pricing, every aspect is so resourceful that you end up with tens of thousands of full-time equivalent employees in your IT department. It's like a monster department, and it's becoming larger and larger and larger, and still you are sitting on top of IT spaghetti.
Love it. I mean, Paul Taylor, the CEO of Thought Machine, talks about the fully automated bank. David, it sounds as if some of those tier one banks are quite some way away from achieving such a situation. But maybe we could just think of the positives here. This initiative exists for a reason. You know, I'm lucky enough to live in the UK, which of course is covered by SEPA. I should state that the single euro payments area is 36 nations. It's all the EU member states, including those not in the Eurozone. But it also includes EEA members, such as Norway and Iceland. It includes the UK and even the microstates, such as Andorra, and of course, Vatican City, important banking centre for those cardinals and bishops with plenty of assets to look after. Let's talk about the positives. Nadish, for companies that really master this, what are the benefits apart from escaping the evil eye of the regulator? Are there any commercial benefits in being a leader in payments?
Well, if you can't move money fast, then no one's going to give you the money. So yeah. The question remains that how do you commercialize it? And I think the positives, back to what you were talking about, are these regulatory changes. Hopefully they are slowing down. We've had the ISO adoption recently, which took its own toll. But the good thing is now we are standardizing towards a standardized method, which is ISO. With SEPA Instant always has been ISO, which is good. So now we have the standardized methods, message formatting, standardized communication mechanisms. Now, if we top it up with added technology like cloud native, resilient, 24/7, all of these things, then interesting new propositions can be built. Exactly to what David mentioned, there are multiple channels with pros, cons, and benefits. And every bank plays in particular segments and targets. So if you target those segments, then this gives you the foundation to come up with new propositions around the commercial business case on how you can actually recover the investment you're making in SEPA Instant now.
Yeah, there's absolutely good arguments. Like, I hope people can see the positive sides of this. David, again, the positive sides. Is it a case that when you've mastered payments, it's probably a good health sign? It's a sign that your organization is healthy, just as a healthy face reflects a healthy body and a good gut microbiome. Companies that have mastered good payments are probably good banks. Is that fair from a technology perspective?
Almost. So basically, what's happening globally currently is that payments are getting commoditized. What these European Economic Area banks are facing is this. Being compliant and being able to receive and send SEPA instant credit transfers costs money. However, the margins on payments globally are shrinking. It's the analogy of telecommunications. Can you remember in the past in telecommunications, first local phone calls lost their margin content. Later, international phone calls lost their margin content. And now we don't even do any more phone calls. We just WhatsApp each other or chat or video chat or whatever. Margins went to zero. The same is happening with payments. And the name of the game is data monetization. Payments are the banking products which can produce the largest amount and the most rich and most valuable input data for a bank. So what you have to reach is to become a bank which can create, capture, analyze, and monetize rich data. There are two ways to monetize this rich data. And again, the primary number one source of this rich data is payments. traditional margins on payments are heading to zero, while banks are slowly learning to monetize, to create value from the payments data. By the way, that's why ISO 20022 is so important, because that creates the language, the standard, the basis for rich payments data. Now, there are two ways to create value from payments data. The first way is to directly monetize it. And we see more and more examples of this. For example, recently, JP Morgan, with Jamie Dimon as a very smart strategic CEO in the USA, has introduced an opt-in for JP Morgan clients to allow JP Morgan to share their spending data, their payments data, with a third party related to Google, and to get payments-based advertisements right into their mobile banking apps. Now that is a nuclear weapon. Payments-based, instant payments-based, targeted advertisements and value propositions. So this is the direct way to monetize payments data. But there is an indirect way. And the indirect way is this. You capture, analyze, and utilize rich payments data as a bank, and you build assets and liabilities on top of that. And using those assets and liabilities, you are creating net interest rate margin. Net interest rate margin has been the primary profit driver in banking in the past 5,000 years. Historically. Now, how do you create assets and liabilities? Assets on the balance sheet of banks is about lending, about credit. So you use payments data to offer loans, to offer credit, to offer active products. And how do you build liabilities? Liabilities on the balance sheets of banks are deposits, savings, investments, fixed income, and other assets. So you look at the payments data, and based on that, you provide instant, individualized offers of investment. One of my favorite products is micro savings, micro investments. Yeah. A client buys a cup of coffee for like 2.75 British pounds, and you take 3 British pounds from the current account of the client, and the remaining 0.25 goes into a portfolio or into a deposit automatically. This creates a spending and saving interrelations, which especially the young generations, millennials and Generation Z, totally love. So when you get it right, it's a huge competitive advantage. But unfortunately, what we see is that 58% cannot get it right.
Love it. That's an astonishing way of looking at things. Absolutely love it. And Nadish, is this what your customers are talking to you about? I mean, on the surface, it looks like when banks partner with Volante Technologies, it's about convenience and adopting a cloud-native SaaS solution that clicks in like Lego and gets up working within weeks. But it sounds as if it's actually, as David was saying, much more than this. It's a sort of data play. It's about having data in an easily accessible form. It's about being able to build products upon and around payments to create entirely new sort of income streams. I mean, Nadish, is this too cutting edge, or is this actually what you're talking to your customers about?
Absolutely. And that is where we look at this as a journey. You're starting off by modernizing, you're starting off by introducing real-time payments, and your end state is actually the business benefits. And that utilization, that business case, the commercialization will depend from bank to bank. It will depend on what areas the banks have or partnerships. But yes, the key point is you need to start now. You need to start taking some definitive steps towards to be in a state where you can actually bring these aspects, the data elements of.
Terrific. And Adish, I've just covered two questions from our esteemed audience members. They kind of overlap from Simon Leong, talking about some banks being unable to adopt cloud-based platforms, including those, I mean, if they're in data secrecy jurisdictions. And I know no jurisdiction likes to call itself a data secrecy jurisdiction. Whether that's a problem. And a good question from François de Witt, who says, is there a problem sort of monetizing data from payments because of GDPR? So do we have those problems about secrecy and GDPR? Is that a major issue with sort of the instant payments debate?
Absolutely. Data privacy laws exist. There are certain jurisdictions where the data has to reside within the jurisdiction. But the interesting thing is cloud provider right now. As we 3 years ago, some of these jurisdictions, you could not think about the cloud because the data was resident in a European or in a regional center. But the cloud providers have now taken that into account, making sure that these jurisdictions are also inclusive in adoption of the cloud. And in terms of GDPR, yes, there are strict rules about GDPR. As in, obviously, you cannot give out details, but as a sample, talking about volumes and stuff, there are strict boundaries around which this data could actually still be monetized.
Excellent. Thank you so much. David, just to wrap us up, because we've got about 2 minutes to go, perhaps you could just frame this for us, because I started this conversation thinking this was a really discussion around sort of banking incompetence, around, yet again, the dreaded legacy systems. But you've actually made me change my mind about this and think this is an opportunity. This is a way for banks not only to gauge their ability to modernize, but to, as you say, just create new products, just to change almost what it means to be a bank. So perhaps you could just give us a final message for people watching this who perhaps feel a little bit negative and in trepidation about the new separate instant payments scheme. David, how can you motivate them to think positively about the future?
All right, so we are in the century of data. Data is the #1 input resource of our new economy. Banks have a huge wealth of data. Let's monetize it, let's get it right, and the shareholders will be very, very thankful. Only our clients will be even more thankful. By the way, GDPR, when applied well, is an argument for data monetization, not against. So GDPR is basically the legislation which is elevating data in Europe to the level of an asset class when you do it right.
Thank you so much. Guys, I really appreciate that masterclass. I've gone from what I appreciate was a pretty ignorant starting point into feeling I've got a pretty good knowledge now of SEPA instant payments and all the different possibilities it presents. And to our audience members, if you want to get in touch with Nadish and explore what Volante Technologies does for so many tier 1 banks and other banks around the world, yeah, you're very welcome to get in touch with them and explore. And David Guri at Banking Reports London. How do people get in touch with you, David? I mean, you're pretty active on LinkedIn and a number of other channels. What's the best way of people getting in touch with you?
LinkedIn. I am ready. I am happy. Let's communicate. And thank you, Charles and Nadish. Great discussion.
Hear, hear. So
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. And from us here at FinTech Talk, thank you very much. See you next week.
Okay.